pleasure to be here with you. My name is Stan Botts, and I'm going to read you the rules of the road for the presentation today. This is your full presentation, and in this part of the competition, you're taking on fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion. I'll keep a timer. You have one there as well. To describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem, and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During the time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you're finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. I'll also have a timer for that. During the Q&A, both you and the judges will stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside of role-playing, some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in simple, practical, common sense fashion, using technical, philosophical terminology, or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. Similarly, any member of the team reading his or her part will also be considered a major mistake. Although you may use notes during this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. I'll introduce myself, and the other judges will introduce themselves, and then we will begin. I'm Stan Botts. I'm retired ethics officer for Verizon. I subsequently was commissioner of operating professional licensing for the state of Maryland and for the Water and Sewer Authority. And I'm happy to be here and hear what you have to teach me.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Rick Diddleman. I was former Senior Vice President for Freeport, McMurray, and Copper and Gold. Spent most of my time in Central Africa, and now I am the President of RMG Africa Advisors.
Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Dowd. I'm a retired executive from Columbia HCA Healthcare Company, and I'm also happy to be here with you.
We're happy to be here too.
When you are ready, you can begin.
Okay. Good afternoon. We are the Bentley Ethics Advisory Council, and we're here to talk to you today about the ethical responsibilities of businesses operating in conflict-affected areas. We're going to be talking to you as a Sodexo Board of Directors about how you can advance peace in Chicago. So hi, I'm Kiana Kanoa, and I'm the ethical consultant.
Please meet you. Hi. Pleased to meet you.
I'm Farid Salam. I'm the other ethical consultant.
I'm Ines Moncresi, and I'm the legal consultant. I'm Oyun Mahekam.
Nice to see you. Yes.
I'm the financial consultant. I'm financial.
Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you.
To give you an overview, we're going to define what a conflict-affected area is, and then we're going to look at Chicago as a conflict-affected area. We're then going to talk about how Business for Peace can be a solution to the problems that affect Chicago, and then we're going to talk about the implementation of our solution program. Then we're going to look at the legal and financial dynamics of our case. So first off, what is a conflict-affected area? Well, as defined by the UN Global Compact, a conflict-affected area often involves human rights violations, systematic discrimination, the lack of social or economic opportunity, chronic poverty, and the presence of an illegitimate or unrepresentative government. Now, when people think about a conflict-affected area, they often think about an underdeveloped country, or perhaps a country that's been affected by a war. And while this is true, conflict-affected areas are also present in our country today. To put this in better perspective, we want to look at Chicago as a conflict-affected area. Now, the UN Global Compact defines Columbia as a conflict-affected area. Now, when you compare the violence and crime in Chicago and Columbia, you can see that they're actually very similar, and in some cases, Chicago's actually worse. For example, worrying about being attacked because of your skin color, ethnic origin, or religion is actually more prevalent in Chicago. The Chicago community has been affected by poverty, crime, and violence that has affected their social flourishing. This leads us to our problem. Conflict creates issues for communities, and it often leads to social instability or human rights issues. This in turn can affect business operations. Businesses have the ethical responsibility to acknowledge this need for peace and see how they can contribute to it. This leads us to our solution. We believe that you as a Sodexo Board of Directors should implement Business for Peace. Now, Business for Peace is an emerging narrative, which promotes the idea that businesses are social actors that can contribute to peace and social flourishing in societies through their stakeholder network. As you know, you've already acknowledged the need for peace in conflict-affected communities such as Columbia. Now, given your interest in promoting peace in conflict-affected communities, we believe that you should look at Chicago as a conflict-affected community and see the need for peace and see what you can do to help it, especially since your mission is to promote the quality of life. Now, in Colombia, you took a stand. You saw how the Colombian community was being affected by conflict, and you integrated the Programa Soluciones, where you took members from the FARC, or the rebel group in Colombia, and you brought them into the workforce and into the community. You allowed them to become part of the Sodexo family without being tied down to their past. We believe that you should do the same in Chicago. You played a pivotal role in contributing to peace in Colombia, and you can do the same in this conflict-affected community. In order to implement this solution, we believe that you should follow your solution program in Colombia and integrate it into Chicago. I'll now bring this over to our other ethical consultant, Fardeen Salam, to talk about our solution program.
Thank you, Kiana. So, with the solution program that we want to instill into Chicago, we want to focus on 5 key ethical responsibilities that should be implemented in the plan. Those ethical responsibilities are the LDP, which is a local dialogue program, promoting workforce development, promoting stakeholder engagement, working with other companies in Chicago to assess the conflict, and providing financial assistance in education. So each of these key points shares the same focus of connecting the various communities within Chicago. And the main goal is to invest into the people and community of Chicago with a plan to reinvigorate the famous city so it can constantly improve its quality of life as the community strives towards success and be able to sustain itself in the near future. So going more in depth about each key point, with the local dialogue program, we want to focus on providing a collaborative meeting space so Sodexo and members of the community and residents of Chicago can have an outlet, so the residents can have an outlet so they can express their concern and point out other areas within the community and within Chicago that need more focus. Going into the promoting workforce development, we're going to focus on reintegrating individuals in society that have been ousted or exiled, such as ex-convicts or members that have been involved with gang violence in the past, and provide them a second chance so they can re-enter without having to worry about other mistakes in the past defining who they are now. With the idea of promoting stakeholder engagement, we want to encourage stronger relationships with the stakeholders of Sodexo. So that means the employees, the community, the customers, vendors, and so on. So everyone that is involved with Sodexo knows that it's a strong relationship rather than something that goes by day. While discussing working with other companies to assess the conflict in Chicago, we believe to instill real growth and change in the environment, we need a collective effort from all firms, big or small, within the region to make real change, because we know that we can't do it alone, and we need to instill everyone that is involved in Chicago and everyone that is part of the Chicago community so that they can help. And finally, in regard to providing financial assistance and education, we believe to lessen the financial stress for the workers and dependents of Sodexo, Sodexo should be able to provide opportunities, whether it be through loans, grants, scholarships, and so on, so that members of Sodexo and residents of Chicago have the opportunity to advance their education and set themselves for a foundation of success in the future. So when discussing integrating the local community with Sodexo, this is based on allowing a second chance for those who have been marginalized in the community and those who really believe that they do not have a chance because of previous mistakes such as ex-convicts and people who have been involved with gangs and gang violence in the past. This also emphasizes the importance of uniting Chicago with Sodexo, so that local residents of the Chicago area know that there's always a resource of support within the company of Sodexo. And this finally relates with working with small businesses in the city so that we can create a large network of firms focusing on giving back to the community rather than just being another member of the community. This goes next towards eliminating divisiveness within the educational system. So we believe it is essential to erase the divides within the university and school systems of Sodexo to form strong bonds between the students and the brand of Sodexo and their workers. So this means, this aligns with the concept of providing educational opportunities for Sodexo employees. So when students are at Sodexo locations at their local school or university, then they're not only interacting with a server at Sodexo, but also possibly a classmate as well. And when finally discussing providing opportunities for the residents of Chicago, we believe that Chicago as a community will have the chance to collectively grow as more individuals can receive a fresh start. And to add to that, there's also a larger number of Chicago residents will have the opportunity to achieve an educational background through the resources that Sodexo can provide and as well as the support that Sodexo can provide. And to wrap it all up, we believe a strong drive to promote positive change will also reinvigorate the local community, so to create a chain reaction that will continuously make more valuable changes for the Chicago community and society as a whole. So, ending off, I'd like to hand it over to our legal consultant, Inez.
So now I'm going to talk about the possible legal issues that you may find when implementing the solutions that Fardeen and Kiana explained before. So these issues would be the background checks while hiring, the liability of employers, the confidentiality of these background checks, and the protections of the other employers of your company, Sodexo. So, why do I mean with the background checks? Every employer, while in the hiring process system, they need and they have the right to check every criminal record history or arrest history of the applicants in the job application process. The thing is that they do this because they want to protect themselves in the future of future possible lawsuits for negligent hiring. But they cannot discriminate the applicants that have criminal history records. That's why the Bandbox campaign was released in 2004. This campaign, its main goal is to push later on in the process the questions about criminal history records or arrest records of the participants in the hiring process. And it has been implemented in 150 counties and in 30 states in the United States of America. Illinois is one of the countries that has this kind of laws. And furthermore, they have in their compiled status the rule for employers, which basically says that it is a civil rights violation to discriminate people in hiring processes just because of their arrest records. So now focusing on our case, you Sodexo won't have any kind of problem with this kind of laws that I explained right now, which is the Bandbox campaign, because you are volunteering to hire people with criminal or history records, so you won't be discriminating them. The thing is that you may have other problems, which are the liability of employer and Master 7 rules. The Master 7 rule is a doctrine that says that each employer is responsible or liable for their employees while they are working under their scope. So when you want to hire ex-convicts, as Kiana and Fardeen proposed before, you may understand that you will have a higher risk. So you are going to be 100% responsible for their actions. This will have financial consequences that my colleague Oyun will explain later on. And here I pointed out some court past cases, which are the Maloney versus B&L Motorfreight and the Taiwanese Furniture Company versus Harrison, that they briefly explain this kind of problem. In addition, the last problem that you may find is the confidentiality of the background checks and the protections of the other employees in your company. So you may not know, but the background checks are confidential. So if you want to hire ex-convicts, to not discriminate them, you need to know that you cannot use that information and you cannot disclose that information to the other employees in the company because it is prohibited by law. So what can you do for not violating the confidentiality of these ex-convicts but protecting the other employees too? As Kiana explained before, we suggest you to follow the Programa Soluciones that you implemented in Colombia because it was really successful and it was a pretty good job implementing and the ex-convicts back in the community and in the work atmosphere, and also giving a safe environment in your company. Now I'll let my colleague Oyun to explain you the financial.
Okay, so all of the some of the legal dimensions that our coworker Ines have explained, they also have financial implications behind them. As she has mentioned before, by hiring ex-convicts in increasing numbers, the company will assume the liability if the employees make a mistake related to their criminal history while on the job. And the average settlement cost of such lawsuits is $1 million, and the highest to be recorded was $26.5 million. However, we believe that with a good vetting system in place, we would decrease the chance of such lawsuit case happening. And another type of cost that may be related to hiring ex-convicts is the insurance cost going up. According to your financial statements, the current insurance cost is 0.25% of your total revenue. And even though the exact number is hard to come by at the moment, since there are so many factors that go into calculating the price of the insurance, we are estimating that by employing 25 ex-convicts, the average cost of the insurance may go up by 5%, so that it would be 0.3% of the total revenue. However, I would like to reiterate that it is all just an estimation, and the exact number is hard to come by at the moment. And the other financial benefit is that, as she has mentioned before, by hiring ex-convicts, the possibility of being served a criminal history-based lawsuit would be out of question, because we would not be discriminating against the employees based on criminal history. Now I would like to pass it on to my coworker Brittany to talk about other financial costs.
Thank you, Wayne. The other biggest financial costs, along with our solutions program, are going to be the hiring of the ex-convicts that we have proposed. As you can see on this graph, that is a recreation of one in your most recent financial statements. Your number of employees hired every year has steadily grown, and this has grown from 2010 to 2017 at an average rate of roughly 6,700 employees per year. You can also see on the other line that your sales have steadily grown along with this number. In your financial statements, you also reported that your wage and salary expense has increased by over $220 million in the last year. Your other employee costs have also increased at $70 million. Hiring ex-convicts, by looking at these numbers, if we hired 25, it would cost you roughly $848,000. Now this number comes from taking your average increase in employees and your increase in your wage expense and other employee costs. While this number seems like a large number, we would like to propose that you don't add this program as a new cost, but rather focus your clear increase in employees every year to our program, so that you can do it with as little cost to you as possible. Another cost that we have talked about is helping out the employees with their tuition costs. And on your website, under your employee benefits, you have listed that you offer case-by-case tuition reimbursements to your employees. Therefore, this cost is one that has already been accounted for under your other employee costs, so I expect that this is going to be included in the $840,000 I discussed before. Now that I've explained to you what the costs are for implementing this program, I'm going to talk to you about the major benefits that your company can see from doing so. The first one is a tax benefit. Under the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, companies can receive tax benefits for hiring employees who are members of groups that are commonly discriminated against in the workplace. This includes disabled people, veterans, and ex-convicts. Therefore, by hiring 25 ex-convicts, your company could see a tax benefit of $60,000 every year for having these employees. The other benefit you will see is from helping out the community. By helping your community, you are stabilizing the economy that you are operating in, which will increase your revenue. And you're also helping out the individuals in the community, which will stabilize their financial position, creating workers for you. We really want to reiterate that you should see this as an investment in your community, because you are stakeholders in the community, and without the community being stable, you would not be able to have such success as you have seen. I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Oyen so she can summarize what we have talked to you about today.
So to recap, it isn't up to debate whether Chicago is a conflict-affected area. You as a Sodexo have successfully implemented Programa Soluciones in Colombia and have brought peace into the Colombia. And we believe that without much of an additional financial cost and legal problems, you will be able to do the same and be the pioneer of change in Chicago.
So, in conclusion, we as Sodexo advisors and consultants would like you, the Executive Board of Sodexo, to consider everything we've said today. We'd also like you to take into account the significant effect that instilling and driving for peace brings towards the community. Sodexo has already paved the way tremendously in Colombia through their Programa Soluciones, and by doing their duty as a corporate citizen, we ask you to do the same in Chicago, fulfilling your duty again as a corporate citizen in the community of Chicago. We hope that you've seen the many benefits and both economic and social, that drive from the instillment of peace, and we hope that you will consider everything that we said, and thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and you all did a wonderful job, and we appreciate you coming. Let me start by asking, one of the things as the board of Sodexo that we were looking to do and hear about a little more was the ethical implications of not doing this and the ethical benefits of doing this. Can someone elaborate to me on what you see as being the downside ethically of not doing it and the upside of doing it?
So when you're looking at this, you're looking at this as a social problem. You know, when you look at conflict-affected areas, these communities are being affected tremendously. And the private sector has an incentive to create peace, and that is their ethical incentive. So when you look at Sodexo and doing this, you know, you've already acknowledged this in Colombia. You saw how communities were being affected, and you took a stand like we said. So ethically, you know, why wouldn't you want to implement peace in these communities? I mean, it's not really a question of why should we, it's, you know, why shouldn't you?
Let me ask a follow-up question on that, because it goes back to me being a fairly conservative member of the board. I view our mission as the mission to maximize revenue for our shareholders, while at the same time complying with all of the laws we need to comply with, and including benefiting all of our stakeholders wherever they may be. Why is it? How does this program benefit us in any way in terms of gaining new business? Because we have business relationships with government organizations that require catering services, hotels, other companies. How is doing this going to improve our reputation or our own standing so that we're actually increasing the amount of revenue we bring in? Or doesn't it? Maybe it doesn't at all.
So, like I said, you're a stakeholder of the community, and the community is one of your stakeholders. And when you're looking at the violence and conflict that are affecting these communities, it's also going to be affecting your operations. And it's not that you're just, you know, the previous narrative was that the sole social responsibility, like you said, was just to maximize your profits. And this narrative is evolving. You know, business for peace is something that's really starting to come out, and it's something that businesses are actually starting to acknowledge even more. So while you need to maximize your profits, you should also be looking at the community as a stakeholder, and all of these, the conflict that's been affecting the communities as your stakeholders.
One follow-up to that. Okay, let's assume that what you're saying is correct. Isn't it, as opposed to in Colombia or in Congo, where we have significant operations, the government has absolutely no ability to impact the community around us. In fact, when they do impact the community around us, it's in a negative way. Chicago is very different. They have police, they have a government, they have a mayor, they have a functioning system that actually is part of the United States and works pretty well. Why is it our responsibility to do this?
So I'd like to point out that actually in Colombia, the government was one of the prime factors that initiated Business for Peace. And I think that the government here should definitely acknowledge the fact that Business for Peace is something that should be brought forth by the community.
Should we do this in collaboration then with the government?
I definitely think they should. we've also acknowledged that you should collaborate with other companies, which is something that Sodexo in Colombia has already acknowledged. Now, you already acknowledge as the board of directors this need for peace in Colombia, and I don't understand why it wouldn't be necessary to acknowledge this need for peace in Chicago.
I guess because in my view, I'm just wondering whether or not the circumstances which are present in Colombia, and Colombia is one country of many, many countries that we're in. They're also...
Yeah, you guys are in over 80 countries,
Right.
which is understandable.
So
I mean,
you've cherry-picked one, which is fine. It seems to work there. But there are a number of other places where we are. Why is Chicago? The thing that we asked you to do was to tell us the responsibility of a company promoting peace in a conflict-affected area. Why Chicago?
so you're asking why Chicago is a conflict-affected area. I mean, there is a number of reasons why Chicago is a conflict-affected area. One being the fact that there's a high number of people who are in poverty in Chicago. There's a number of ex-convicts in Chicago that don't have the ability to have a job because they are being discriminated against. And there is, I would say, a lack of authority in Chicago. I mean, there has been a number of gun violence, gang violence that the government hasn't acknowledged. And this is something that business have the power to acknowledge. Now, oftentimes people think about business ethics as being, what companies shouldn't do. But business ethics is also about what companies should do. Looking at how companies can better themselves and can really start momentum for peace, being one of them. So, I mean, you're really looking at it as like, why is this good for me?
I'm looking at it, why is it good for us? As a company,
Yeah.
why is it good for us? And I'm very, very reluctant as a member of the board to delve into an area that I think is effectively the government's place. I'm a
So
little
would you
bit
say-
reluctant to do that.
I definitely understand your reluctancy. So would you say that, so you acknowledge this in Colombia? I mean, you saw this, the head of the board of Sodexo acknowledged this, and then they gave Sodexo in Colombia, the incentive to do this. So they looked at that conflict, which is obviously very different in Chicago, but in other ways, like we said, very similar. So, looking at it in Chicago, you should see this need for peace, as we've described, and see that you can be, a force for peace. And it's a very complex mindset to look at, but it's something that is evolving and is starting to come through.
Why Chicago though, and why not Atlanta or Gary, Indiana, or why not Miami? Why not Chicago?
And Chicago specifically, America has a lot of conflict-affected areas if you really think about it. And we looked at Chicago mostly because they have the increase in crime and violence in Chicago has been something that the media has looked at, for decades. So it's something that we wanted to definitely touch across. But I mean, this implementation can be looked at in a various number of conflict-affected areas, in the community.
Well, as a more liberal member of the board, I like the idea. Brittany talked about a tax credit if we hire ex-cons. However, these people, that's not the right term, but folks who are in that position traditionally come with a lot of baggage, and recidivism is not uncommon. So it's a very slippery slope. It's good to do, and the tax credit is good. So my question to you would be, what would be the ideal profile of the ex-con that you would want to hire at Sodexo?
So when our team discussed who we would like to where would we draw the line, we always decided.
What would be, not so much to draw the line, but I've got in my mind the ideal candidate, and this candidate should look like this and have these qualities and this skill set, and this is really what we're looking for.
So when we discussed this, we kind of thought the ideal candidate would be someone that really went through the rehabilitation process of the U.S. Federal law system, where they've gone through their time, they've completed it, they've gone through probation, and it's usually someone that learned from mistakes such as possession or drug abuse, someone that where the rehabilitation process within the U.S. Prison system helps look at. And we also want to emulate what the Sodexo Colombia program solution is implemented as well. Before these ex-convicts were even hired, they also went through another rehabilitation process that Sodexo watches over. So it would be someone that can go through both of these type of rehab processes while showing and proving that they are a changed person that can look back on their mistakes but understand that this is an opportunity to grow in the future.
Okay. Well, as we look at the employment rate or the unemployment rate, we're looking at 4%. So employees are hard to come by, particularly in our business. So I'd be for anything that would get us some qualified employees. It's hard to find good people. I have one more question about, you mentioned the divisiveness in the educational system. Exactly what is that? And what are you prepared to do for that?
So what we've seen through our time in the universities and other universities is that there seems to be a sort of separation between employees of say Sodexo or food service employees or employees of the university and the students. And it's always just that's what they do and this is what the students do. So we wanted to change the culture of universities and schools so that employees of Sodexo or any other food service company isn't just another worker. They're part of the school culture, they're part of the school organization. They're here to help, and they're not only there to do their job, they can be someone else that can provide help if needed in various ways possible in the school community.
Is there anyone else I'll stick with the Chicago area. We've got a conservative and we've got a liberal. I'll be on this board. Is there anyone else, business in Chicago that you see who may be willing to be on the forefront of doing this? Because Sodexo, I think, can certainly benefit in terms of their image and building peace in Chicago or business of peace. But I think Chicago's a pretty big city, and it's pretty close to other places that I think there may need to be some additional help. Do you see anyone else who can help? He gave the example of why Chicago and not Gary. If you know the geography there, Chicago and Gary are so close, they run back and forth across that bridge in Chicago and Gary all the time. And so just trying to do it in Chicago, I'm thinking, talk to me about someone else, maybe from a financial standpoint, who would be a partner with us and would help to make this a little more palatable for our conservative board members and shareholders who are really looking at the bottom line.
Yeah, well, actually, Business for Peace has been signed by multiple companies, various multinational companies, which is what you guys are, such as Coca-Cola, Taza Chocolate, and those are companies that are prevalent in Chicago that would be willing to collaborate with Sodexo in order to promote this idea of peace.
To add to that, there are also a number of nonprofit companies within Chicago's region that also, their main focus is to improve the communities, and one of them being Lift Chicago, which is part of the LIFT program within the United States, which is a nationwide program that aims, again, to lift the communities out of poverty, out of the many problems that are affecting them. And actually, Sodexo in Chicago is starting to focus on collaborating with LIFT Chicago as well.
So what you're saying is that people are doing this already? Is
Yes.
that what you're saying?
Yes.
Is this, we're not an early adapter, there are other companies that are, maybe they're not hiring ex-cons, but they're doing things similar.
Well, these
Yes.
are smaller nonprofit companies. We believe with the size and stature of Sodexo, we can make a bigger impact through collaboration and working with these smaller companies.
I mean, you're certainly starting momentum, but there are already companies who have signed into Business for Peace and agreed to this.
So if we were to go and we got an appointment with Ron Emanuel and the three of us representing the board went into the mayor of Chicago, Ron Emanuel, and what would our elevator pitch be? What, in 30 seconds, what would we be telling him?
We need peace. You need
Of course,
peace.
everybody needs peace.
I mean, Chicago is being affected by so many things, especially in this time and age. and you're a social actor that can promote it. And I don't see why the mayor of Chicago would be, against you helping the Chicago community. I mean, why would he?
Well, he might object to someone coming into his office and saying, we're here to help provide peace in Chicago. He's going to say, what are you talking about? We have plenty of peace in Chicago. From a political perspective, he wouldn't say anything different, I don't think.
And then you can describe how Chicago is a conflict-affected area.
I'm particularly interested in what you touched on about the nonprofits, because I didn't hear that in the presentation. But I know that we try to encourage lots of our employees to get involved with volunteering and doing work with nonprofits, and we know about nonprofits being kind of the seeding area for these kinds of activities. That was something that caught my ear, and I'd like to know, do you know of any other organizations working with nonprofits, and what is possibly the model that they're using to bring about this building of peace in Chicago?
Okay. So he has also mentioned Lyft. There's also this organization called 0%. So as we already know, Sodexo is a catering company, so they're producing food. What 0% does is that they collect the leftover food from restaurants and catering services, so that they can collect the food and provide give it to people who are in need. So we can also collaborate with 0%.
See, now I'm going to take my conservative hat off, put my really liberal hat on. And I don't quite like that program because it's a non-sustainable program. In other words, I like all of the things that Sodexo does to be sustainable so that it will last, our impact will last far beyond our presence in Chicago. I don't like the idea of simply giving food away because that creates dependencies that are not necessarily healthy. I like the idea of participating in projects that will reduce the need for people to go hungry. That I like, but this particular program I don't. So sorry, I'm switching hands on it.
Don't worry about that. That's why we believe Sodexo's position in Chicago is important to really improve the program and change it in a way. Because Sodexo has the numbers, the size, the people who are able to formulate programs that can be sustainable. So even though what we were talking about, so was it
0%.
0%? Even though she was talking about 0% and how it may seem to be like a unsustainable program, we believe Sodexo has the resources and the authority and the people that can formulate a program by working with them that can be sustainable.
Can I ask a question on a legal issue? What is our legal obligation to do any of this?
Our legal obligation would be to...
No. I don't want the legal obligation in implementing it. Do we have a legal obligation to do any of this?
No.
So why would we do it?
It's not all about legal things and that, there's more, there's the ethical part. I think that you are just focusing on the revenue, obviously you're a company. I know.
That's why I'm not the
I know that you're a company and you should be focused only on the revenue, but as you may know, as Kiara explained before, this is something that you have already implemented in Colombia, and you are not losing money with it. And
I would forget Colombia for 1 second, and the reason why I would do that is because the reasons why things were done in Colombia were for a very different reason than we would do them in Chicago. So I much prefer. Because I don't like the argument that, well, you did it and it was really worked nicely in Colombia, so let's do it in Chicago. What's the problem in Chicago we're trying to solve? And then let's go after that. And I'm still not 100% certain I fully understand hiring of ex-cons. Does that solve our problem?
Well,
Or, I'm not even sure I understand completely what the problem is. We're not going to stop people from shooting one another in the streets.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so would you agree that ex-convicts have a hard time reintegrating back into society?
I would agree that, traffic accidents happen all the time in the streets of
But would
Chicago.
you agree that ex-convicts have a hard time getting back
Sure.
into society? I mean, would you agree that Chicago has a lot of poverty?
Sure.
Would you agree that Chicago has a lot of gun violence?
Probably more than in most cities, yeah.
It does. So you can see that there's definitely problems in Chicago that can be, alleviated through peace, through, contributing more into society. And, I know that you said to, look past Columbia, but as the board of directors, you've already seen this. I mean, it's not like it's something that you don't agree with. It's not something that you need to see because you've already seen it. You've already seen that conflict can affect communities and that communities have a hard time. And especially, look at the Black community in Chicago. There's a lot of poverty specifically in the Black community in Chicago. And that's because they don't have the social and economic opportunity that, say, the white community in Chicago has. And being Sodexo, being a strong company that you are, wanting to make your brand image look better, wanting to be more sustainable, this is something that you can do that can help these communities. And, there really shouldn't be an incentive of what is this going to make us as much money, because we've explained that it's not going to cost you a lot of money to make. You've already seen the cost that it's costed you in Columbia. We've also seen maybe there's not a legal, incentive to do this. Maybe you don't have to do this legally, but do companies always base their decisions off of whether or not they should do this legally? It's usually whether they shouldn't do it.
They do make their decisions based on a certain finite number of things, whether it's to increase revenue, to increase reputation, to increase, something tangible for the company. Generally, we don't do things, that's not to say we don't have foundations, for example, that go out and loan money for, not loan money, but grant money for good deeds, but we do that for reputation building.
And you're not doing this on a whim. You're definitely doing this to increase your brand, image. It would definitely increase your brand image, especially after, Sodexo had an issue with, not treating their employees correctly. So this is something that can help you understand that Sodexo is trying to treat their employees correctly. This is going to help you in the long run. And in the long run, societies that are, working better and are more peaceful end up helping the companies that are operating in it. And we're not just looking at Chicago, we're looking at a number of communities in America that have these types of issues.
Would it be a stretch to say we're looking at what you're talking about here as business for peace, being like a supply chain, where we're looking at the residents of Chicago ultimately becoming the employers of Sodexo, ultimately becoming, then if we, from some of my involvement in volunteer work and other areas, when I look at these kind of supply chain issues, normally when we talk about hiring ex-cons and recidivists or whatever, we talk about drug problems, we talk about murderers, whatever, it seems to always start with we need to do something better in terms of educating the population. So I'm wondering if what you're saying and what you're getting at is that we have a education problem in Chicago, and we got to be careful saying that because Mayor Emanuel will come back and say we don't have an education problem. We got to always be careful of how we may offend our government folks because they don't like to be told they're not doing the job well. Some of us in the industry have a different opinion, but could it possibly be that we're saying that at Sodexo we want to come in and be a partner and help you with maybe looking at this entire picture and trying to go back to the genesis of where all of this starts? Because the guy who goes on the street and pulls out his gun and shoots or whatever, it doesn't start the day before when he had to be. This starts weeks, years, and sometimes back to the little minor scuffle he had in kindergarten. He didn't like bullies from that point on, and the way he handled bullies is to get him a 9mm. Yeah, so, excuse me for getting on the soapbox, but it sounds like what you're asking Sodexo to do is to come in and help to systematically change the culture.
Certainly.
Yeah, so No, I was gonna say that's definitely like the picture from a meso or a macro level of perspective, and to solve those like macro like problems, is to look at it from a micro perspective. And again, it's by looking at poverty rates, educational rates, crime rates, and the way to absolve the crime rates is through increasing the educational rates and lowering the poverty rates. And that is through, again, the solution that we want to implement through providing educational opportunities for the residents of Chicago, connecting them with other various groups within the community. So say, for example, the police environment or police authority in Chicago, connecting with more of the local community, so there's more of a connection rather than a divide. And also brings into the fact that Chicago being one of the most polarized cities in terms of ethnicity and race, where there's a large number of it's described how like the South Side is normally the racial minorities, so blacks and Hispanics, and then in the North it's mostly those of Caucasian descent, so whites. And you can also note the large difference in poverty rates between those two sides. So if you want to really reintegrate Chicago to be more balanced and lower the poverty rates in both sides and increase the educational rates as well, you have to look at it, you have to start off from the macro level, slowly have it build until you go up into the macro. Start off in the micro level, slowly have it build into the macro level.
So if you take that analogy, I don't think we can be exilistic. We cannot be all things to all people. There's a limit to what we can do. And if you look at the lane we're in, what we can do that maybe some other folks can't do is we can hire people. We can put people to work. We've got a booming business. We need good people for our catering business. We can do that. I'm not so sure we can change the culture. There's a lot of wraparound services that are needed here. I know we can't do that. But what we can do, and this might be your pitch, let's look at what we can do. Yes, all of these things are important. Yes, wraparound services are needed, most of which we cannot do. We don't have the expertise to do. But we can hire and train and support people who want to work hard and get ahead of them. That's what we can do. But we can't do all that other stuff.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure. Sure.
My question is this. You've made a focus on hiring ex-cons. I can't help but think that, Tom, you made a very, very good point, that 4% unemployment rate, I presume in Chicago, although I'm not as close to it as the people on the ground, that finding good people is probably an issue, I would assume. Why focus on ex-cons and not on going out into the community and looking and being aggressive and trying to interest people in the community to come work for us? Why? Because I mean, there are people who are not ex-cons who also probably want jobs and aren't in the loop. Maybe the thing for us to do is to get community buy-in to what we're doing, and not just ex-con community, is to go out into the community and aggressively advertise for our positions.
Yeah.
Something we're probably not doing.
We did focus on ex-cons, but we've also talked about how you can engage with the communities. And I would definitely look at, minority communities and communities where people don't have this opportunity to work for Sodexo, and that's how you can push it. To answer your question, we wouldn't just focus on ex-cons. We would look at, the minority, specifically because they're usually the ones who are, really being unfairly treated in our society.
Can I just add something to that too? If you look at, while there are other people who need jobs and we could focus on them as well, if you look at the ex-convict, if they, let's say, went because they were selling drugs and they go to jail, they do their time, and they come out and they are being discriminated against for the fact that they have these felons on their record and they cannot find a job after. They have a way that they knew they could make money before that, so if they can't find a job, they're going to go back to that. If we offer them a job to get out of this kind of behavior, that's how we're going to pull people out of it.
I think that recidivism is not necessarily linked only to having a job or not having a job, unfortunately.
I mean, they definitely are going to have to want it. That's definitely an issue in its own. But this is something that can definitely start momentum to help alleviate the issue.
And how do we hire Tom, you mentioned, what's the candidate look like? What is it?
The ideal profile.
Can we even do that from a legal perspective? Can we discriminate against any of these people?
No, but it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, that if they come through the door and,
You evaluate them as...
yeah, I mean, everybody is welcome, but if you've got some baggage, we can work with you.
Very interesting topic. As in many cases, you all took on